There comes a transformative moment in the psychological journey when the darkness that once controlled you from the depths of your unconscious finally rises into the light. And in that revelation, it loses the tyrannical power it held over your life. Carl Jung devoted much of his life's work to studying what he called the shadow, that hidden territory of the psyche where we bury everything we have rejected, denied, or repressed about ourselves. For a long time, this inner darkness seems like an invisible force shaping your reactions, your desires, and even your fears, without you ever understanding where all of it is coming from. It moves beneath the surface, subtly but persistently influencing your choices and your self-image. For most people, the shadow remains unconscious for their entire lives. It continues to operate through projections, compulsions, and patterns of self-sabotage that feel mysterious and uncontrollable. It can make you react with intensity when the situation does not deserve it, pull you toward relationships that repeat old wounds, or make you fear traits in yourself that you only dare to acknowledge when you see them in others. But there comes a turning point, a deep inner shift that arrives after honest introspection, painful self-confrontation, and the slow work of emotional honesty. In that moment, the shadow is no longer an enemy, no longer a hidden saboteur. It becomes integrated, and the very energy that once felt destructive begins to transform into creative power, clarity, and inner stability. This shift marks the beginning of a new phase of psychological liberation, a stage where the shadow no longer dominates your energy, but instead complements it. Jung understood that the shadow is not merely the collection of your flaws or your personal darkness. It is the totality of everything you had to repress to be accepted by others, to adapt to your family system, or to conform to the expectations of your culture. It contains all the emotions you were never allowed to express, the desires you were taught to hide, the strengths you had to minimize, and even the creativity you sacrificed to fit in. Yet it also contains immense psychological gold, positive potentials, strengths, and gifts that you buried because they threatened the status quo around you. The first clear sign that your shadow no longer controls your energy is that you stop projecting onto others what you have not accepted in yourself. Jung discovered that projection is the primary mechanism through which the unconscious shadow influences our daily life. When something within you remains unacknowledged, you begin to see it exaggerated in other people. You criticize in others what you secretly fear or refuse to confront in your own personality. You become disproportionately angry at behaviors that mirror traits inside you that you have not integrated. Before integration, if someone appears arrogant, you might react with rage because you have not accepted your own repressed arrogance. If someone seems weak, you might despise them because you have not integrated your own vulnerability. If someone is successful, you might feel envy because you have not yet claimed your own right to succeed. Every disproportionate emotional reaction becomes a clue, an invitation to explore a part of yourself that has remained hidden, unprocessed, or split off from consciousness. But when you have done the work of integration, something fundamental begins to shift. You no longer need other people to become villains so you can see yourself as the hero. You no longer interpret the world through the lens of your unhealed wounds. You can recognize the imperfections of others without needing to condemn them, because you have already looked inward and witnessed your own imperfections with honesty. You can watch someone else succeed without feeling that corrosive envy, because you have finally reclaimed your own inner power and no longer believe that someone else's success diminishes your worth. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections, and he considered it one of the clearest markers of psychological maturity. When you begin to notice that your emotional reactions toward others have softened, when situations that once infuriated you can now be observed with calmness, when you no longer carry the constant need to identify external enemies, it means that your shadow is being integrated. You are no longer controlled by the emotional storms that used to overwhelm you. Instead, you are able to stay present, grounded, and aware, responding from a place of wholeness rather than instinctive defensiveness. This withdrawal from projection is not a sign of coldness or indifference. It is a sign that you have taken responsibility for your inner life. It means you are no longer outsourcing your unresolved conflicts onto the world. It means you have begun to walk the path toward becoming whole. The second sign is that your patterns of self-sabotage have decreased dramatically, and you are now able to sustain success without unconsciously destroying it. Jung observed that the unintegrated shadow behaves like an inner saboteur, quietly undermining precisely the things the conscious ego wants the most. This creates that exhausting cycle where you reach the edge of a breakthrough, only to do something that collapses everything right at the moment of progress. You finally land the job you always dreamed about, and suddenly you start showing up late, again and again, as if some invisible hand were pushing you back into the familiar. You find yourself in a genuinely loving relationship, and then you unconsciously spark conflicts that erode the very connection you longed for. You begin an important project filled with passion and potential, and then you procrastinate until everything crumbles. These patterns are not bad luck, nor are they a sign of weakness or a lack of discipline. They are the shadow, expressing itself through old unconscious beliefs that whisper that you are not ready, not worthy, or not allowed to move into a larger version of yourself. The shadow stores every unexamined limiting belief you absorbed in childhood, every message that told you that wanting too much makes you selfish, that shining too brightly makes you a threat, that succeeding will isolate you, or that love is conditional. And from the darkness of the unconscious, it acts with astonishing loyalty to those old stories. It protects you from rising too high because, in its distorted logic, safety lies in staying small. But when your shadow is integrated, when you bring these old beliefs into the light and examine them without fear, their power dissolves. They no longer run your life from behind the curtain. You stop sabotaging yourself automatically. Success becomes something you can sustain rather than escape from. You can receive love without shrinking, without feeling that it is a mistake or that you must pay a price for it. You can express your strength without fearing punishment. You can show your gifts without expecting rejection. Jung lived this transformation himself. He understood the torment of repressing desires that felt unacceptable for someone who wanted to be taken seriously. When he finally acknowledged his ambition, his longing for recognition, and the full force of his creative drive, his relationship with his own shadow changed. He no longer had to pretend to be small to fit an image of what a scientist should be. The parts he rejected became integrated, and with that integration came freedom. If you notice that the destructive patterns that once dominated your life have softened or disappeared, if you can finally hold on to good things without tearing them down, if your life is stabilizing at levels of success that once felt unreachable or unsafe, it means your shadow has been integrated enough to stop working against you. The energy that was once used to pull you down is now free to help build the life you truly desire. The third sign is that you have developed the capacity to hold your own internal opposites without collapsing into one extreme or the other. Jung referred to this as the tension of the opposites, and he considered it central to how the psyche matures. Every human being contains a spectrum of contradictions: love and anger, strength and vulnerability, independence and longing, light and darkness. The immature personality tries to identify with only one pole and banishes the opposite into the shadow. But the person who has integrated their shadow can hold both poles at once. Before integration, if you were the strong one, you couldn't show vulnerability without feeling like your entire identity was being threatened. If you were the nurturing one, you couldn't express anger without feeling guilty or ashamed. If you were the rational one, you couldn't allow yourself to feel deeply without believing you were losing control. Each extreme keeps the opposite locked away, creating rigidity and psychological imbalance. But when the shadow is integrated, you gain fluidity. You can shift between different aspects of yourself depending on what the moment requires. You can be strong when the situation calls for resilience and vulnerable when intimacy demands honesty. You can love deeply while also setting firm boundaries. You can think analytically and still open the door to your emotional world. Jung called this the transcendent function, the inner process that creates a synthesis between opposites rather than letting you remain trapped in conflict or denial. It allows you to experience yourself as something deeper and more whole than any single identity could express. If you find yourself becoming more flexible, more capable of accessing sides of yourself that used to feel forbidden or dangerous, if the rigidity of your personality has softened into a richer, more nuanced complexity, it is a sign that your shadow is being integrated. You no longer need to be one-dimensional in order to feel safe. You are becoming the fascinating, contradictory, complete human being you were always meant to be. The fourth sign, and this one reaches a deeper layer, so give it your complete attention, is that your dreams have begun to shift from persecutory nightmares to more balanced or even collaborative encounters with dark figures. Jung devoted an extraordinary portion of his work to dreams, regarding them as one of the clearest windows into the state of the shadow. He discovered that when the shadow is completely unconscious and unintegrated, the psyche produces dreams filled with terrifying persecutors, monstrous beings chasing you, criminals trying to harm you, or dark forces threatening to destroy you. These dreams represent the ego's fear of the shadow's contents, and also the intense energy the shadow must generate in order to be seen. Yet something remarkable begins to happen as the work of integration progresses. The figures in your dreams start to change. The monster that once chased you relentlessly may now simply watch you from a distance. The criminal that used to attack you might transform into a dark but wise guide. Even the destructive forces that once seemed bent on annihilating you may reveal themselves as raw power that you can channel and direct. Jung documented this shift meticulously in his own dream journals. As he confronted his own inner darkness, he observed how the tone, symbolism, and intention of his dream figures evolved. If your nightmares have decreased, if the dark entities in your dreams now have ambiguous or complex qualities instead of appearing purely evil, or if you've even had dreams in which you collaborate with or integrate these dark aspects, your unconscious is signaling that the process of integration is truly taking place. Dreams are the direct language of the unconscious, and when the unconscious reflects progress, you can trust that reflection far more than any rational analysis created by the ego. The fifth sign is that you have reclaimed personal power you once projected onto authority figures or expected others to grant you. Jung understood that part of what we repress into the shadow is our own power, our ability to influence, to lead, to take decisive action. Many people, particularly those who grew up in environments where showing strength or confidence was punished or discouraged, push their natural power into the shadow and then project it onto authority figures. Before integrating this aspect of the shadow, you wait for bosses, partners, parents, or institutions to give you permission to be powerful. You complain that no one gives you opportunities without realizing you haven't given yourself permission to step into your own potential. You search endlessly for external validation because you haven't validated your own right to occupy space, to speak with authority, and to exert influence. This repressed power leaves you feeling powerless, even though you may possess extraordinary abilities. But once you begin to integrate this disowned strength, something revolutionary happens. You stop waiting for others to empower you, and you simply claim your power as your own. You make decisions without needing approval. You speak your truth without the paralyzing fear of judgment. You take up space without apologizing for it. You exert influence without shame or guilt. Jung referred to this transformation as the realization of the inner authority, the moment when the self becomes your guiding force instead of external voices or imposed structures. If you've noticed that you no longer chase after external validation, if you can make important decisions while trusting your own wisdom, if you feel authorized from within even when others disagree, then you've integrated a crucial aspect of your shadow. The power you once projected onto others finally returns to its rightful place, within you. And paradoxically, this doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you more balanced. Power that has been integrated is power that becomes responsible, grounded, and conscious. It's important to understand that shadow integration is not a single event, but a continuous process. Jung was very clear about this. There will always be new layers of shadow to uncover, new repressed aspects waiting to be brought into the light. The psyche is far too vast, too deep, too complex to be fully known in a single lifetime. But there is a profound difference between being dominated by the unconscious shadow and being in conscious relationship with it. When the shadow dominates you, it controls you through invisible projections you don't recognize, through self-sabotage you can't explain, and through psychological rigidity that feels impossible to break. But once you've done enough work to develop a relationship with your shadow, even when new material rises from the depths, you now have the tools, the awareness, and the inner stability to work with it consciously. You are no longer a victim of your unconscious. You become a collaborator with it. Jung spent his entire life exploring, confronting, and integrating his own shadow. Even in his later years, he reported discovering aspects of himself that had remained hidden. But by then, the process no longer terrified him. It fascinated him. He had developed what he described as a religious attitude toward the unconscious, a profound respect and a willingness to continue the dialogue, knowing that the unfolding of the psyche is endless, and yet endlessly meaningful. If you want to continue exploring shadow work and other profound dimensions of Jungian psychology, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because every day we dive deeper into insights that can release the psychic energy trapped within the unconscious. This kind of inner work is not just another task on a spiritual to-do list, it's the most important journey you can undertake because it influences absolutely everything else in your life. The more you illuminate what once remained hidden, the more freedom you create in every thought, choice, and instinct that shapes your existence. Liberating yourself from the tyranny of the shadow is one of the most transformative experiences along the path of individuation. It's as if you had spent your entire life living under the rule of an invisible dictator, one you never saw, yet who controlled your emotions, impulses, and reactions. And then, suddenly, that dictator is dethroned. The power that once felt threatening becomes something you can finally use, something that fuels your growth instead of sabotaging it. Life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes more real, more fluid, more aligned with who you truly are beneath all the layers you once mistook for your identity. If you recognize these signs in your own experience, if your projections onto others have diminished, if patterns of self-sabotage no longer dominate your decisions, if you are now able to hold opposing emotions or ideas without collapsing into confusion, if your dreams have shifted in tone or symbolism, if you have reclaimed a sense of personal power that once felt lost or fragmented, then allow yourself a moment of acknowledgement. Congratulations! You have undertaken one of the most demanding psychological tasks a human being can face, a task that many avoid their entire lives, because confronting one's inner darkness requires more courage than most people ever imagine. You have looked directly into your own shadows without running away. You have approached your inner darkness without identifying with it, without letting it define your worth or your destiny. You have taken its raw, chaotic energy and transformed it from something destructive into something deeply creative. Your shadow is no longer your enemy. It has become your ally, a source of intuition, strength, and authenticity. And all the energy it once used to derail your progress, to delay your growth, or to keep you trapped in cycles of fear or repetition is now available to you. It becomes fuel for building the life you genuinely want to live, the life that reflects your essence rather than your wounds. Have you ever wondered why some people feel so deeply while others seem to move through the world untouched? Could it be that empathy is truly a virtue, or is it a curse disguised as nobility? And what if I told you that your sensitivity is not a spiritual gift, but a psychological scar that learned to smile? The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, said Carl Jung. But what happens when, from the very beginning, everything you are was shaped to keep others comfortable? When your very existence is reduced to the silent mission of feeling on behalf of others what they never wanted to feel themselves? If you are here, perhaps you have already noticed something unusual about the way you exist. Maybe you often feel drained without knowing why. Maybe you've spent your whole life apologizing for having needs. Maybe you carry an anger you don't know how to name, a fire burning within. Not because you hate others, but because for years you have forgotten yourself. This is not a hymn to the empath. It is a dissection, a ritual of clarity, a brutal yet necessary invitation to look in the mirror and face the question most people avoid. And what if my kindness were only a well-trained defense mechanism? Today, guided by the abyssal psychology of Carl Jung, we are going to explore the wound that gave birth to your way of feeling. We are going to pull apart what lies beneath your compassion and why it may be silently destroying you. You were not born empathic. You were born human. But at some point, and you might not even remember exactly when, your survival instinct was forced to transform into sensitivity, not because it was beautiful, but because it was necessary. Jung never romanticized empathy the way social media does today. He understood that many times a good heart is really a stifled cry. A child who learned too early that emotions were dangerous, that asking was risky, that taking up space was punishable. So that child learned the subtle art of disappearing, of feeling for others everything no one wanted to feel for them. Empathy for Jung often arises as a neurotic response, not a choice, but a mechanism, a shield disguised as an embrace, a prison disguised as love. Emotional hypervigilance is born not from evolution, but from survival. It becomes the embryo of what we call empathy in adulthood. But Jung gave it another name: premature adaptation of the ego. It happens when a child's psyche, pressured by an unstable environment, rushes ahead in its development. It learns codes it should not know. It becomes too mature, too soon. It transforms into the advisor, the shield, the healer, and in the process, disappears. Have you ever felt that no matter how much you give, how present you are, how tirelessly you help, no one takes care of you in the same way? That is the hidden root of neurotic empathy, the habit of giving as survival, not as generosity. You learned that love came with an emotional bill, that you were only valued when you did something for others, that caretaking was the safest way to avoid abandonment. You became an antenna, picking up pain, silences, and subtleties. But what about you? Who ever picked up on you? Jung said that the true tragedy is not having a shadow, but not knowing it exists. And in the empath, that shadow is made of rage, ego, and need. All the things you learned to repress to be accepted, everything you call selfishness, but which is really your right to exist. How many times did you swallow your tears to avoid disturbing others? How many times did you bend yourself to someone's mood just to keep the peace? How many times did you say, "I'm fine," while silently begging for an embrace? Compulsive empathy is not a virtue. It is trauma refined. It is a soul that learned to survive by silencing itself, by loving excessively, by always yielding. And that kind of empathy comes with a heavy price. It costs you health, energy, and identity. It turns you into a useful ghost, always present, always invisible. And here lies the cruelest paradox. The empath suffers for feeling too much, yet fears stopping. Because if they stop, they believe love will vanish, the bond will break, and without sacrifice, they will be disposable. But Jung warns us, the soul needs truth more than peace. And the truth is that you do need to learn to be selfish, not vulgar, destructive, narcissistic selfishness, but what Jung called healthy narcissism, the capacity to recognize yourself as legitimate, to say no, to put yourself at the center of your own life without fear of being hated. The empath falls ill when they do not understand that being good does not mean erasing oneself, that true love demands boundaries, that compassion is not carrying others on your back, but extending your hand with both feet firmly on the ground. You do not need to save anyone. You need to stop abandoning yourself. How many times have you felt proud of being the one everyone turns to when they're broken? Now ask yourself, whom do you turn to when it is you who needs help? Do you see the imbalance between all you give and how little you allow yourself to receive? Deep down, you still believe love depends on your usefulness. You still hear that inner voice whispering, "If I don't help, I'll be left behind." Jung called that conditional identity, a version of you created to satisfy the expectations of others, a golden cage where applause is endless but freedom non-existent. You are not merely empathic, you are trapped in a cycle of emotional self-denial. And the worst part is, the world applauds you. They call you generous, sensitive, with a huge heart. But no one sees the exhaustion. No one notices how much rage you swallow, how much frustration builds in silence, how often you dream of vanishing. All of it sinks into the shadow. Jung said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." It is time to bring that darkness to light, to recognize that your empathy is beautiful only when it is not born of guilt, not born of fear, not compulsive. You can be good, but only if you are good to yourself too. You can care, but not at the expense of your sanity. You can love, but only if you include yourself in that love. The hidden root of empathy is not generosity, it is survival. It is that child who never could be selfish, never could scream, never could demand, and so became someone who feels for everyone except themselves. But something within you is changing now. You are beginning to listen to yourself. You are tired of pleasing. For the first time, you are considering putting yourself first. And that is a revolution. Because as Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you, dear empath, were not born to be the emotional backbone of a broken world. You were born to be whole, with light and shadow, with love and anger, with empathy and ego. To be good is not to die for others. To be good is to live for yourself, and then overflow. Now, there is something you need to know. Have you ever noticed that precisely when you most need to stay calm, your mind collapses? That loss of control is not only emotional, it is mental. It happens because most of us were trained to feel before thinking, to react before observing. The problem is structural. No one taught us to train the mind like a muscle. That is why every minor frustration becomes an explosion, and every challenge an inner defeat. But there is another way to operate, a structure based on neuroscience, applied philosophy, and silent mental techniques that reprogram the way you respond and return command to you. There are children who, even before learning to read, already master the invisible vocabulary of other people's emotions. They don't need anyone to say, "I'm sad." They feel it, they sense it, they anticipate it. They develop a kind of silent radar that detects the scream before the sound, the blow before the gesture, the disappointment before the word. These children are not magical, they are survivors. Carl Jung called this psychic antennas, a form of emotional hypersensitivity that arises when the family environment is not safe enough for the child to simply exist. They learn that the world around them is unpredictable, and that to survive, they must grow eyes where no one sees, ears where no one speaks, intuitions where logic cannot reach. They become emotional sentinels, not by choice, but because their integrity depends on it. Do you remember what it was like? Watching every step of your parents, deciphering their mood just by hearing a tiny shift in tone, walking carefully as if the floor were made of invisible glass, realizing that sometimes silence was more dangerous than shouting. The antenna child grows up believing their own feelings are dangerous. If they cry, they are called weak. If they laugh too loud, they are exaggerated. If they ask for attention, they are selfish. So they learn not to express themselves, and later, not even to feel. But here lies a cruel truth. When you silence your pain, your body keeps screaming, only from within. That child becomes the adult who picks up everything. The energy in the room, the unspoken pain of another, the tension carried in a glance. They become the friend who feels something is wrong, the partner who notices the mood shift, the worker who knows when the boss will explode. They become useful, even admired, but not for who they are, rather for how much they can adjust to others. Jung saw this as a profound imbalance, a socially accepted neurosis, because it shows up as generosity, empathy, altruism, but deep inside, it is a refined form of self-abandonment. You feel everything from everyone, all the time, except yourself. And do you know why? Because looking inward hurts more than absorbing the pain of the world. Because your own wound is too ancient, too heavy, ignored for too long, and terrifying to face. Jung called this inner disconnection a soul excision. It is when you specialize so much in feeling the other that you become a stranger to yourself. How many times have you found yourself in relationships where you were always the one who understood, the one who forgave, the one who explained their side? How many times did you justify emotional harm by saying, they had a hard childhood, or they don't know how to handle their feelings? You are not compassionate. You were conditioned. You don't forgive with your heart. You forgive with guilt. You don't understand with empathy. You understand with fear. Fear of rejection if you demand respect. Fear of abandonment if you set boundaries. Fear of being called selfish if you dare to choose yourself. And here lies the psychic price of feeling too much. You stop being a self and become an extension of the other. You know what they want, feel, and need. But when someone asks you, what do you want? Silence swallows you because you don't know. You became fluent at interpreting others, but illiterate about yourself. Jung said, the soul cannot bear lies for too long. It begins to scream through anxiety, chronic exhaustion, repeated relationships, the feeling that something is wrong with me and I don't know what it is. That cry is often silenced with more empathy. You help more. You listen more. You carry more. But the truth is, you need a hug, and no one ever gave it. You need to be seen, but not as the person who understands everyone. You need to be seen as someone who also needs understanding. And that terrifies the child who grew up praised for being mature, because breaking that role means breaking the identity built over a lifetime. But what if Jung was right? What if that identity is an illusion? What if you are not truly that endlessly empathetic, available, understanding person, but rather someone who learned to be that way, to survive in a world where being authentic was dangerous? You feel too much, not because you are enlightened, but because you were too exposed, too vulnerable, subtly abandoned. Your extreme sensitivity is, in truth, the trace of abandonment. It is the symptom of a childhood where you had to monitor the climate so you wouldn't be swallowed by the storm. Jung knew what that produced: repressed rage, fragmented self-esteem, hunger for recognition, unconscious attraction to emotionally unavailable people. You don't want to be loved. You desperately want to finally be enough. But for that, you will have to disappoint some people, the ones who grew accustomed to your docility, the ones who feed on your guilt, the ones who call change your first step toward freedom. You will have to abandon the role of antenna, and that is frightening, because deep down, you feel that if you are not useful, you will be discarded. But the truth Jung left us is different. You will never be whole as long as you are only the reflection of another. It is time to turn inward, to rescue the child who once learned that feeling for others was safer than being herself. She is still there, scared but alive, and she longs to be embraced not as a spiritual tool, not as an emotional warrior, but as what she always was, a human being who deserved to exist without fixing anyone. That is your task now, to sit with that child, to be with her in silence, to say, I no longer need to guess what others feel. Now I want to know what I feel. And when that inner voice begins to surface, fragile, doubtful, confused, listen to it. Listen with the same care you always gave to others. Listen as one who holds a broken mirror with steady hands and an open heart. Because you are not an antenna, you are a complete being, with history, with wounds, with a voice, and at last, with permission to use it. Every empath has a limit, and almost no one notices when that limit has been crossed, because they don't shout, they don't fight, they swallow it. But inside, there is a fire. Carl Jung warned us, everything we don't face within will appear outside as destiny. And perhaps that is the empath's destiny, to end up surrounded by people they themselves taught not to respect them, not out of cruelty, but out of habit, through a silent history of self-abandonment disguised as kindness. The empath, that apparently sweet, understanding, enlightened being, carries a heavy, throbbing shadow hidden beneath the cloak of goodness. And that shadow, dear one, is rage. Not loud rage, but ashamed rage. Rage that was never allowed to exist. Rage that learned to silence itself, to turn into "it's fine," into "it was nothing," into "let it go," but that never forgets what was denied, stores it, and collects its debt. Jung said, the unconscious is timeless. What was not lived still pulses inside us, demanding passage, demanding existence. And in the case of the empath, what was not lived was the right to protect themselves, to say no, to stay, to leave, to have desires. Do you realize that your rage is always turned inward? You help too much and feel used, but you say nothing. You always give in and feel small, but you smile. You are the last to be heard, and still you thank for a listening that never came. How long? How long will you carry others' weight, believing it makes you better? That is not kindness. It is prison. Jung called this process shadow formation, by moral conditioning. It is when everything you feel, but that doesn't fit the ideal imposed on you, gets thrown into the depths of the soul. Rage, frustration, ego, desire, fatigue, all labeled ugly, wrong, selfish. But what happens to all that you repressed? It becomes symptom, turns into chest pain, becomes insomnia, becomes exhaustion, becomes chronic resentment, and sooner or later, it becomes explosion. The person who always said yes, one day screams. The one who always understood, one day cuts ties. The one who carried the world, one day drops everything, and no one understands why. How could you change? You were always so accessible. What a disappointment. A disappointment for whom? For those who got used to your silence? For those who projected the role of savior, therapist, parent onto you? Jung called this projective identification. People do not relate to you. They relate to the role you assumed. And when you start dismantling that role, they feel betrayed. But the truth is, you had already betrayed yourself when you accepted a part you never wanted to play. And here is the crucial point. That rage beating within you is legitimate. It is yours. It is sacred. It is life energy telling you, enough. Enough of swallowing it all. Enough of staying silent. Enough of justifying yourself for having human needs. You have the right to say no, to fail, to refuse to help, to choose your own well-being without giving explanations. The rage of the empath is not destructive. It is the vital signal of a soul tired of pretending docility. But before it can set you free, you need to look at it with new eyes, without fear, without shame. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. And for the empath, that darkness is the repressed scream. It is the boundary never set. It is the life pushed aside so the other could be comfortable. Does it seem beautiful to give all of yourself? And you, what do you receive? Does it seem noble to always forgive? And who forgives you? Empathy without regulation becomes prison. You get lost in others' emotions and forget that you too have a heart that bleeds, How many times did you want to scream, "Enough," but only said, "It's okay"? How many times did you think, "And me," but kept smiling? That emotional repetition creates an existential void. You become an empty vessel, useful, functional, lovable, but empty. And that is why rage appears. It wants to wake you up, to remind you that you are still alive. Rage, deep down, is self-love that learned to wear armor. Do not run from it. Do not fear that fire. Learn to direct it. Jung spoke of the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to unite opposites. In your case, empathy and boundary, kindness and firmness, sweetness and protection. That union is what he called the integration of the shadow. It is not about choosing between remaining good or becoming cold. It is about allowing yourself to be whole. You don't need to be less sensitive, but you do need to be more complete. The person you long to be, the one who loves without erasing themselves, who helps without destroying themselves, only emerges when you face your shadow and say, "I see you, I hold you, I release you." The rage of the empath is the fury of one who was never seen, who was used as an emotional anchor without ever being able to anchor in anyone, who carried the world's traumas on the fragile shoulders of a child who only wanted a hug. And do you know what the first step toward healing is? Saying no without guilt, without justifying yourself, without fearing the loss of a love that only existed while you denied yourself. The empath, in order to flourish, must frustrate expectations, must disappoint those accustomed to their submission, must break the cycle that held them captive, even the cycle within. Jung called this the courage to individuate, to become who you truly are, even if that means abandoning who you pretended to be. And that courage begins with one simple, radical act: choosing yourself. There comes a moment when the empath, the one who feels everything for everyone all the time, finally perceives an uncomfortable truth. No one asked you to sacrifice yourself, and yet you sacrificed for peace, for acceptance, for love, for a safe place in the world. But what did you get back? Silence, exhaustion, invisibility. It has been said that an unlived life is a sickness of the soul. And perhaps this is the silent illness of so many empaths, living halfway to sustain the image of someone who always says yes, someone who loves, helps, endures, even when everything inside begs for rest. Then a subtle moment arrives, sometimes almost imperceptible, when something breaks inside. An invisible thread that always kept the empath tied to the savior role snaps, and what follows is a void, not the void of lacking, but the void of discovery. The discovery that you spent years being good out of fear, that your generosity was compulsive, that your capacity to listen to everyone was a way to silence yourself. You called it love, but it was an escape from rejection, from loneliness, from your own emotional complexity, an escape from the truth. A certain wise voice taught that the path toward healing begins with confrontation. And there is no confrontation tougher than this, realizing that sacrifice was never a choice. It was programming, conditioning, survival. Since childhood, you learned that your feelings were not a priority. You were the strong one, the mature one, the different one. You could not make mistakes, complain, or shout. You were praised for taking care of others. But nobody noticed that by doing so, you were stopping living. They shaped you to attend, not to be attended to listen, not to speak, to give, not to receive. And so a specific kind of prison is born, the prison of obligatory goodness. But here lies the secret many ignore. True altruism only arises from choice. When it comes from fear, It is only slavery under another name. So ask yourself now, honestly, without defenses. How many times did you say yes when you wanted to say no? How many times did you love someone who hurt you just to keep the connection? How many times did you put another's pain above your own and then cry in secret? This is where emotional authenticity is born, not as a pretty ideal or a theoretical concept, but as a cry of the soul, as an urgency, the urgency to stop lying to yourself. You no longer need to erase yourself to keep the peace. You no longer need to sacrifice yourself to be loved. You no longer need to hide your pain behind empathy. Emotional authenticity is born the exact moment you decide to stop being a character. It arises in the discomfort of disappointing others, in the pain of losing ties that only existed because you pretended not to have desires. It is born like any real birth, with pain, with blood, with rupture. And like every birth, it demands courage. Courage to look the one you love in the eyes and say, I can't keep abandoning myself to keep you close. That is not cruelty, it is psychic maturity. A certain psychological tradition calls this process the transcending of the persona, the social mask we use to be accepted. For the empath, that mask goes by names like good, understanding, strong, mature. But that mask suffocates. One teacher warned that the more perfect the mask, the more the soul is suffocated. So you have to choose. Will you keep being the functional empath, admired and exhausted? Or will you begin to build your true self, even if that brings twisted looks, accusations of selfishness, and the loss of some relationships? It is a choice, and perhaps for the first time, you are ready to make it. Emotional authenticity is like opening a window in a room where the air was already scarce. At first, the wind frightens you. You feel cold, dizzy, but little by little, you realize you can breathe. Breathe without needing to please. Breathe without calculating the emotional impact of every word. Breathe without being everyone's emotional consolation. Another teaching says, the authentic self is the one that integrates all rejected parts. And for the empath, one of those rejected parts is precisely the right to exist without guilt. You have the right to exist without justification, to have no energy, to change your mind, to care for yourself before caring for others. That is not selfishness. It is emotional justice. And there lies the key to transformation. Your empathy does not need to die. It simply needs to stop being compulsive and become a choice. You can keep feeling, but now with discernment. You can keep helping, but now with boundaries. You can keep loving, but now with roots. Emotional authenticity does not eliminate sensitivity. It sharpens it. It transforms empathy from a silent curse into a conscious gift and returns you to yourself. And in the end, perhaps what the old teachers most wanted to show is that individuation is in truth a return, not to the person others expect you to be, but to the one you always were before you learned to hide, sacrifice, or choice. You no longer have to die for anyone. Now you can be born for yourself. There comes a point when you look at everything you built and realize that much of your life was shaped not by desire, but by duty. Friends you maintained to avoid hurting someone, relationships you held together to avoid disappointing, family you tolerated in silence, while inside you died a little at each gathering. You called that love, but it might be a neurotic adaptation, the version of yourself you manufactured to be loved, even if that meant disappearing. This chapter is about return, not the shallow, essential self sold by coaches, but the center of gravity of your psyche, sovereignty. A maxim says, "He who looks outward dreams, he who looks inward wakes." Waking for the empath means realizing that your gift only becomes power when it's freed from the obligation to save the world. The empath was not born to be a martyr. They were born to be whole. But how to achieve that when everything, absolutely everything, pushes you back into the caregiver role? When your identity was built on the idea that your value lies in being useful, sensitive, sacrificial. Start with rupture. The rupture that at first seems selfishness, but gradually reveals itself as courage. Courage to choose yourself. Courage to disappoint. Courage to be unavailable all the time. Courage to be clear, even when that causes silence. Courage to have needs, to be inconvenient, to be real. Some call this psychic differentiation. The moment you understand, I am not others. I am not what they expect of me. I am an autonomous universe, and that universe has its own laws, limits, desires. It has yes and no. From this point, the empath's journey changes direction. They stop functioning as an emotional thermometer of their surroundings and begin to be an axis. Someone who feels, yes, but chooses what to do with what they feel. Someone who loves, but who also loves themselves. This new empath is what some would call individuated, no longer driven by an unconscious need to repair, but propelled by the conscious strength of simply existing. They learn that not every pain is theirs to carry. Not every story deserves their ear. Not every request demands an answer. For someone who lived as a reflection, this is liberating but also painful, because it requires breaking invisible contracts with those who grew used to using them as an emotional crutch. You will disappoint people. You will be accused of having changed. You will hear that you are distant, cold, strange. But remember, those words come from those who benefited from your lack of boundaries, from those who confused empathy with servitude. And here is the most powerful twist. The relationships that survive your sovereignty are the only ones that deserve to remain. This phenomenon is relational recalibration. Dynamics reorganize, fragile ties break, true bonds deepen, and finally you realize it wasn't you who was hard to love. It was your relationships that were too superficial to hold your depth. That is the beauty of emotional sovereignty. You stop begging for spaces that crush you and begin to inhabit spaces that expand you. But beware, sovereignty has a price. You will no longer have excuses. You will no longer be able to say, "I did it because they forced me." You must own your decisions, your absences, your presence, your silence. And many retreat here because it is easier to keep saving others than to face the void of not knowing who you are without that function. It's more comfortable to remain the pleasant one than to be the selfish person who prioritizes their mental health. But you already know, every comfort that demands your absence is a kind of emotional suicide. So choose the discomfort of presence, the weight of truth, the nakedness of authenticity. You don't have to be the hero, the mirror, or the eternal shoulder. You can simply be you, flawed with desires, contradictions, intensity, and rest. Another wise teaching said, true freedom is born when you accept your wholeness. And the empath's wholeness does not reside only in their light, but also in their shadow, in their fatigue, in their anger, in their silence. Sovereignty is not a permanent state of balance. It is the capacity to hold yourself without needing external applause to feel complete. You are not responsible for everyone, nor for the world's moods, nor for the wounds of those who refuse to heal. Your greatest responsibility now is to yourself, and paradoxically, when you choose yourself, You are finally able to choose others with more truth, without guilt, without dependence, without effort. You help because you want to, not because you need to. You listen because you have the energy, not because you are obliged. You love because you overflow, not because you beg for acceptance. That is sovereignty. And for the empath, that is rebirth. So breathe deeply. You are not betraying anyone. For the first time, you are being loyal to yourself. And that, my dear, is the true miracle of conscious empathy. At the end of everything, when the night is more honest than any daytime words, a question arises we can no longer sweep under the emotional rug. And when will someone care for me? Maybe you spent your life being someone's shoulder, the emotional anchor for many. Maybe you learned that loving is caring, serving, offering, even emptying yourself completely. And everyone applauds you for that. They call it compassion, generosity, a gift. But a brutally honest perspective offers a different view. Not all empathy is virtue. Sometimes it is only the scar of a childhood in which you had to feel for everyone because no one was willing to feel for you. The empath is not born only with a big heart. They are formed in environments where their own heart had to shape itself to others' pain to avoid disappearing. Environments where they learned that being loved requires effort, that existing means being useful, that others' silence must be filled with their constant listening. You became a mirror, a cure, a crutch. By so much reflecting, you forgot your own face. But now something has moved within you, perhaps imperceptibly, like the first tremor before an earthquake, perhaps as a subtle discomfort, a different tiredness, a need to no longer be available, and for the first time, not feel guilty about it. That is the seed of your individuation. This process of becoming who you are does not arrive as illumination, but as crisis. You don't wake up one day feeling free. You collapse, you abandon the character, you break the armor, and you allow the true self, the one you left behind to fit in, to finally return. But that self returns with demands. It no longer wants to be useful. It wants to be free. It wants to love without begging. It wants to give without emptying. It wants to be without having to save anyone. And that is where everything begins to reorganize. Relationships dissolve, patterns break, and you hear for the first time phrases like, "You're different. You're not the same." Have you become more selfish? Perhaps your response may be a silent smile, because now you understand. It isn't selfishness, it is sovereignty. You're not abandoning anyone, you've simply stopped abandoning yourself. For the first time, you can see that the cries you heard in others' emotions were echoes of your own drowned voice. We are warned that the shadow, that forgotten part of the soul, is not a villain. It is the part of you you had to bury to be accepted. In the empath's case, the shadow is made of will, of a legitimate rage, of tiredness, of boundaries never expressed, of desires that never had permission to exist. And now, that shadow no longer wants to be hidden. It wants to be integrated. You don't need to heal by becoming less sensitive. You need to heal by becoming more authentic. Because deep down, healing is not becoming another person. Healing is stopping the pretense. You will still feel a lot, but now you will choose who deserves access to your feeling. You will still love, but now you will know when that love begins to hurt you. You will still help, but not to be loved, because you overflow. Finally, you understand that true empathy is not the kind that makes you vanish. It is the kind that is born of your wholeness. And do you know the most beautiful part? You no longer need to explain yourself. You can simply exist with presence, depth, silence, and choice. And if the world keeps telling you you've changed, you look in the mirror, perhaps with tears, and whisper, "Yes, at last I have." For the privilege of a life is to become who you really are. If you've made it this far, perhaps you already feel it in your flesh. You're no longer trying to win the world's love. You are finally learning to love yourself enough to choose where and with whom you wish to remain whole. And now the remaining question is not how to please others, but what keeps me alive. I needed to write this script with the lights off, truly, like talking to someone in the dead of night, not to teach or to convince, but because something inside needed to be heard too. For years I was that person described here. The empath, understanding, reliable, the one who listened to everyone, helped everyone, and returned home with a tiredness no bed could cure, would say, "It's okay, even with pain that wasn't mine." You swallowed offenses as if swallowing guilt. You truly believed that putting others first was a way of being good. But there was a night, one of those nights no one posts on social media, when you collapsed in your bathroom without an audience, without a pretty speech, without a rational explanation. You simply broke. It was then you understood what individuation meant. It is not a pretty process. It is visceral, solitary, like tearing off a mask that had become skin. And if you are listening now, perhaps you have already lived your own broken dawn. Or maybe you are on the verge of it. Whatever the case, I thank you deeply for allowing yourself to feel this video, for not fleeing from the words that hurt, for walking with me between lucidity and delirium. Your empathy is not weakness. It simply needs to be a choice, not a sentence. Perhaps today you will say your first no without guilt. Maybe tomorrow you'll say, "I need to," without shrinking. Or maybe you will simply breathe deeply, close your eyes, and for the first time feel, "I deserve to care for myself." If that happens, if a single line from this video turns into action in your life, then every word was worth it. If you've made it this far, chances are you have a habit of sticking around, even when things probably lasted longer than they should have. Maybe you've lingered in draining conversations, unhealthy relationships, or repetitive patterns that refuse to break. But for now, let yourself become both the closing chapter and the first page of something brand new. And hey, if after watching this, you decide not to comment, subscribe, or hit like, that's perfectly okay. I'll just take it as a sign of your kindness. No added expectations for me to carry. But if you feel called to join me in this slightly wild, thoughtful adventure, you know how to show your support. Give this video a thumbs up, share your thoughts below, subscribe, or send this along to a friend who always seems cheerful but quietly bears the world alone. As for the two videos on your screen, one might send you spiraling into your next profound reflection, and the other could be the lifeline you didn't know you needed. You'll only know if you give them a shot. I'll catch you on the next deep dive, or maybe during one of those late nights when pretending everything's fine gets exhausting. Until then, remember, treat yourself with the same tenderness you've always offered to others. Imagine this. Two voices are shouting inches from your face. One demands explanations. The other throws accusations you do not deserve. You feel the pulse in your throat, your hands ready to defend themselves, your mind preparing desperate sentences so the world will not misunderstand you. And yet true power lives precisely in the gesture almost no one masters. Bringing a finger to your lips, choosing silence and holding a steady gaze. Silence is not absence, it is a sheathed sword. The one who understands this stops begging for understanding and begins to govern the narrative. Because, as Carl Jung would remind us, truth alone rarely decides anything. What decides is the story others believe, and the one who holds that story is not the most sincere, but the most centered. The problem begins when you are seduced by the need to clarify everything. The moment someone distorts your intentions, you rush to justify every detail. You say, "It wasn't like that. Let me explain. Let me prove it." Without realizing it, you have signed your surrender. Why? Because by justifying yourself, you declare two things without saying them: that the other person holds moral authority to judge you, and that you need their approval to feel whole. You enter the court of your adversary with their rules, their audience, and their executioner. You made the most expensive mistake in the game of power, accepting the enemy's mental frame. You wanted to be fair. You ended up being predictable. Carl Jung would have described this as surrendering your center to the shadow of another. The perception of power is not born from transparency, but from mastery of the inner and outer scene. Excessive explanation does not repair reputations, it weakens them. Before a crowd, the one who rushes to defend themselves looks like someone hiding something, even when they are telling the truth. It is unfair, yes, but the human world is rarely a perfect tribunal. What you call clarification sounds like anxiety. What you feel as cooperation, the audience perceives as need. And need is the favorite scent of predators. There is another path, one that does not beg for love, but inspires respect. One that does not ask permission, but establishes presence. It is the path of the silent operator, rooted in inner individuation. Do not justify yourself. Breathe, pause, observe. When the crowd expects you to crawl through a tearful speech, choose calm. That audible emptiness disarms. It steals the emotional script from the accuser and leaves them without footing. People begin to wonder, if this person were truly cornered, why are they not rushing to defend themselves? And then the doubt that protects you is born. Maybe the one who is shouting is exaggerating. Imagine an everyday scene. Someone tells you are arrogant. The common impulse answers, "You misunderstood me." The operator responds with a slight smile. Interesting point of view, and lets it sink like a stone into still water. There is no pleading. There are no long lists of good deeds. There is instead a certainty. You are not playing on chudge ground. These kinds of phrases are not evasions, they are structures of frame control. They close the door to emotional combat and open a window to reflection. The one who attacked you hears only themselves. The echo of their anger begins to sound ridiculous. Elegant reversal is the second weapon. Accusation, "You are manipulative." Response, "It is curious how people call manipulation what they cannot control." Accusation, "You are cold." Response, "It is strange how frightening calm can be. You do not insult, you do not threaten, you do not justify, you reframe. With a simple turn, you reveal the other's motivation without naming it. This mirror is lethal because it does not debate facts, it exposes psychology. And psychology, when revealed, leaves the aggressor feeling naked in public. At work, the art of not defending yourself opens doors that technical brilliance never could. You are in a meeting, and someone says, "Your strategy is poorly thought out." The ego wants a 20-slide presentation, but mastery says, Good observation. How would you do it differently? You shift the burden of proof. The one who criticizes must now create. Many voices fall silent when asked to build. In relationships, someone claims, "You didn't care." The anxious person lists sacrifices. The operator holds the gaze and acknowledges the other's emotion without swallowing it. That is how you feel. The conversation shifts. The storm loses fuel. On social media, someone calls you fake. The novice writes an open letter. The operator delivers a precise and penetrating line. Truth unsettles more deeply than lies. This isn't meant to persuade the troll, but to remind the audience to remain focused, because the secret isn't silence itself, but the conscious direction of emotional energy in the moment. Whoever shouts first usually loses. Whoever speaks last, from inner calm, often prevails without raising their voice. This strategy demands more than clever words. It demands an unwavering body. Posture is part of the message. Chin slightly lowered, shoulders relaxed, breathing slow and expansive. When the accusation comes, maintain eye contact for a second longer than expected, and then deliberately look away, as if you don't need the room's approval. Avoid micro gestures of anxiety. Don't explain with your hands. Don't laugh nervously. Don't scratch the back of your neck. People don't consciously analyze these things, but they sense them. Physical serenity validates verbal serenity. Remember the golden rule. Never argue about facts when the framework is moral. Good and evil are a trap. Ask yourself instead, who benefits from this? That question dissolves the strategy. Question the purpose, not your innocence. When endless explanations are demanded, offer guidance. This isn't a debate that will improve our outcome. If you're looking for a solution, let's set accountable deadlines and clear metrics. If you're looking for accusations, I won't participate. Those who need chaos resent operational clarity. Those who seek results welcome it. You'll also see that silence isn't passivity, but an active act of selection. You choose which battles deserve your energy, and you assign a price to your attention. When the price is high, few dare to buy it with cheap attacks. A reputation for being inaccessible is more protective than 1,000 arguments. Those who fear losing your presence will choose their words carefully. Those who hate your calm will reveal themselves in their disarray. You, meanwhile, remain unscathed. There are daily practices to cultivate this discipline. In the morning, 5 minutes of square breathing. Inhale 4 times, hold your breath. Exhale 4 times, hold for 4. This trains your nervous system not to betray you when your blood starts to boil. Before meeting someone difficult, write 3 short responses that will end the conversation. Noted. Does it seem logical? Is it clear? Also, prepare 3 reframes. This isn't personal, it's a process. This isn't moral, it's logistical. It's not about me, it's about the objective. Keep these silver bullets ready. Don't improvise. Improvisation is a lot like anxiety. They'll talk to you about empathy as if empathy meant obedience. True empathy understands the other person's pain without abandoning your own inner order. Not defending yourself isn't dehumanizing yourself. It's rejecting manipulation. You can acknowledge the other person's emotion while refusing to participate in their charade. I understand you're upset. That doesn't mean I accept your judgment of me. The first sentence heals. The second enslaves. There will be times when it's prudent to clarify something in writing, perhaps for legal reasons or for professional reputation. Even so, preserve the architecture of power. Brief, objective, without embellishment. Write with the voice of a notary, not with the weeping of a victim. On this date, this happened. For future communications, use this channel. I'll stop here. The reader doesn't need your heart. They need your boundaries. There will also be those who, unable to see you fall, will try to provoke you in public. That's where theatrics matter. The voice shouldn't be raised. The silence should be audible. Mentally count to 3 before responding. Sometimes, a simple no without justification is the tallest cathedral. Don't say no because I said no, and let the emptiness do its work. The emptiness forces the other person to fill it with their own anxiety. The crowd quickly learns who the adult in the room is. There's a spiritual dimension to this strategy: detachment from judgment. Carl Jung understood a monastic truth hidden in the psyche. The greatest freedom is not being loved, but not needing to be. When love comes as a consequence of your presence, it is a blessing. When you chase it, it becomes a sword. God or destiny doesn't ask you to please everyone. They ask you to remain whole. The system, however, wants you to be obedient, to apologize for existing. It wants you to apologize for speaking up, for setting boundaries, for being yourself. Do not collaborate with that design. Humility without a spine is submission. Humility with a spine is sovereignty. Carl Jung would say that strength without consciousness becomes brutality, but consciousness without strength becomes neurosis. They will tell you strategy is cold. It is, and that is precisely why it works. Lower temperatures extinguish fires. Loyalty, when consciously directed, becomes medicine in situations where raw emotion is pure gunpowder. Do not confuse warmth with compliance. You can be warm in intimacy and impenetrable in public. You can love with tenderness and negotiate with steel. Carl Jung warned about psychic inflation, but he also warned about self-betrayal. Do not justify the borders of your inner world to those who have not earned the right to cross them. Observe the larger stage now: politics, corporations, fame. Those who endure are not the most brilliant, but those who refuse to be dragged into trivial conflicts. Learn to lose small battles in silence so you can win decisive wars without firing a shot. If today you ignore a minor slander, tomorrow you will preserve the energy required for a greater movement. In the chessboard of reputation, the pawn of explanation is expendable. The queen of silence decides the game. Train the art of the final phrase. Do not release it every time, but always have it ready. I have nothing more to add. What? That will be all for today. We will see each other in the results. These are seals of closure. Support them with micro-actions of self-possession. Gather your things without haste. Finish your coffee. Slightly bow your head and leave. Carl Jung understood symbols deeply. A calm exit speaks louder than a noisy entrance. Theater teaches us that the last gesture is what the audience remembers. Be aware of one risk. Silence must not turn into systematic contempt. Contempt breeds unnecessary enemies. Your goal is not to humiliate, but to deactivate. If possible, preserve the other person's dignity while affirming your own. I will not enter this debate, but I appreciate your perspective. This keeps bridges intact for tomorrow. If the other insists on burning them, let it be their fire, not yours. You will also discover an unexpected advantage. When you stop justifying yourself, your true allies appear. Carl Jung wrote that individuation repels the crowd, but attracts the conscious few. People with discernment respect those who do not ask permission to exist. You will notice that without asking, others will defend you, not out of pity, but because they associate your calm with authority. This is victory without war. Win through reputation, not confrontation. The invisible war of narrative is won by the one who expends the least psychic energy. I propose an immediate ritual. Think of 3 accusations that still wound you. Write them down. To the right, write your silence, your closure, and your reframing for each one. Practice them softly in front of a mirror while holding your gaze. Practice box breathing and the 3-second pause. Carry these tools in your mental pocket. The next time someone provokes you, do not improvise, enact. There is one sentence that will hold you in the hardest moments. I owe no explanations. This is not arrogance. Carl Jung would call it psychic hygiene. I owe no explanations to someone who judges without knowing. I owe no explanations to a crowd hungry for drama. I owe myself coherence with my purpose and respect for my time. When you repeat this, you will feel your pulse slow, the scene losing its texture of threat and becoming a stage. And a stage that does not dominate you belongs to you. Your transformation will become visible through subtle forms. You will speak less and do more. People will see you enter, and without knowing why, they will lower their volume. Some will call you distant, others will call you serious. Those who matter will call you reliable. They will seek you not for gossip, but for decisions. Your presence will become a natural antidote to chaos. And pay attention. The more order you embody, the more disorder will attempt to approach you. Do not be surprised. Light always disturbs those who live off shadows. Smile, you are no longer playing that game. If attacks persist, remember the 3rd instrument, the documented boundary, a brief message that establishes terms, not emotions. To continue, these are the conditions. If they are not accepted, you withdraw. Withdrawal is not cowardice, it is strategy. Great powers do not waste missiles on mosquitoes. What is small is resolved through silence or process, not through epic speeches. In the end, this discipline will return something you may not even realize you lost: peace. Not the peace of being liked by everyone, but the peace of no longer needing it. You will sleep with a clear conscience, not because the world applauds you, but because you did not betray yourself by asking permission to exist. Carl Jung would have appreciated this kind of victory. No fireworks, no parade, but definitive. If this message unsettles you, it is a sign it concerns you. No one trained us for this. We were conditioned to be docile, to explain, to apologize for having limits. The system does not want you thinking. It prefers you justifying yourself. Today, you break that script. When this video ends, decide who you have been answering to that does not deserve your voice. Write their name. Write the phrase, I owe no explanations, and breathe. That minimal act is the beginning of your inner kingdom. From now on, your life will follow 3 strict laws. Calculated silence. Not everything deserves a response, and what does deserves it on your terms. Brief and neutral response. One sentence that closes, not one that feeds. Elegant reversal. If you respond, let it be with a mirror. You will watch the tides change. You will see provocateurs avoiding your shores. You will see true allies approaching like ships with white flags. Do not forget to train the body. The mind can still betray you with words, but the body rarely lies. Practice remaining still when provoked. Practice keeping your hands motionless when a subject excites you. Practice holding the pause after an accusation as if time were abundant. That convinces the room that you are not on trial, that you are the judge of your own temple. Now apply it today. If someone tries to pull you into their theater, breathe and sheath the sword. Look them in the eyes, lower your voice, and say the minimum. Noted. I will not engage in that. We will see each other in the results. Stand up and leave if necessary. Do not dramatize your exit. Let your absence speak. Learn to love the sound of closure. It is the music of those who do not negotiate their dignity. If this message made you think, subscribe, comment, and share. Not out of seduction, but because the world needs more people who do not kneel before manipulation. It needs more spines, fewer leaves in the wind. On this channel, we train for that. Power without shouting, influence without excuses, strategy without guilt. Repeat with me, I owe no explanations. I control the narrative. Because power is not in convincing others. Power is in never needing to. From today on, it begins to belong to you. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the invisible weight you have dropped by renouncing justification. It is the weight of external judgments you carried out of habit. Let it fall. When you open them again, you will step into a world still full of accusations, misunderstandings, and pointing fingers. But now, you will do what few dare to do. You will smile slightly, place a finger on the lips of your mind, and walk. Let the noise bark. Your silence governs. Your presence orders. Your final word, brief and clean, will always be the same. No. And when needed, enough. And when appropriate, nothing. That minimal orchestra composes the symphony that power recognizes as its own. If someone still demands your full version, remember this: the version is not explained, it is embodied. They will watch you act with coherence, watch you avoid sterile controversy, watch you produce results, and the world, out of sheer survival, will end up respecting what it cannot control. Do not defend yourself, not because you are perfect, but because you are no longer available for empty judgments. Facts will judge you, and facts born from silence often speak louder than any speech. That is all for today. If you feel this armor fits you, leave a comment with the phrase, "I do not justify myself, I sustain myself." That way, I know you reach the end and the seed has taken root. Subscribe, comment, and share this video if it made you think. We will meet again in the next one, where we will continue sharpening the edge of your mind. Remain calm, guard your presence, respect your time, and remember, those who do not defend themselves rarely need to.